I've been here. And then I'd remind my colleagues that in the 2012 election, Obamacare, as it's called, and I'll be more polite, the ACA, was a subject that was a major issue in the campaign. I campaigned all over America for 2 months, everywhere I could, and in every single campaign rally, I said, and we have to repeal and replace Obamacare. Well, the people spoke. They spoke, much to my dismay, but they spoke, and they reelected the President of the United States. Now, that doesn't mean that we give up our efforts to try to replace and repair Obamacare. But it does mean that elections have consequences. And those elections were clear in a significant majority that the majority of the American people supported the President of the United States and renewed his stewardship of this country. I don't like it. It was not something that I wanted the outcome to be, but I think all of us should respect the outcome of elections which reflects the will of the people. So we just went through a long, many-hour, I can't call it a filibuster because a filibuster is intended to delay passage of legislation. There was no doubt that there was a time certain that the time on the floor would have to expire. So I guess the kindest depiction I can say was extended oratory that took place for many hours on the floor of the Senate, which is the right of the Senate, any senator to do. I respect that right, and obviously the longevity of the discussion was something that was certainly admirable. But during the course of that discussion conducted by my friend from Texas, he said, quote, if you go back to the 1940s Nazi Germany, look, we saw in Britain Neville Chamberlain, who told the British people, except the Nazis, yes, they'll dominate the continent of Europe, but that's not our problem. Let's appease them. Why? Because it can't be done. We can't possibly stand against them. And then he went on to say, I suspect those same pundits who say defunding Obamacare can't be done. If it had been in the 1940s, we would have been listening to them. They would have been saying, you cannot defeat the Germans. I resoundingly reject that allegation. That allegation, in my view, does a great disservice for those brave Americans and those who stood up and said, what's happening in Europe cannot stand. When the ship was turned back and the passengers on that ship were sent directly to the gas chambers, when Czechoslovakia fell and the slaughter continued, there were many who raised their voices. And then there were those who went to war because of the barbaric and great threat to civilization and everything we stand for. Amongst them were my father and grandfather. I do not agree with that comparison. I think it's wrong. And I think it's a disservice to those who stood up and shouted at the top of their lungs that we cannot appease and that we must act. And we did act. And it's a disservice to those who did act. Now, I spoke to Senator Cruz about my dissatisfaction about his use of this language, and he said he only intended it to be applied to pundits and not to members of the Senate. I find that a difference without a distinction. I find that something that I think I had to respond to. I do not begrudge Senator Cruz or any other senator who wants to come and talk as long as they want to, as long as they can, depending on the rules of the Senate. But I do disagree strongly to allege that there are people today who are like those who prior to World War II didn't stand up and oppose the atrocities that were taking place in Europe. Because I have an open and honest disagreement with the process of not agreeing to move forward with legislation which I agree with, which was passed through the House of Representatives, and comparing it to those who were the appeasers, as Senator Cruz described them, is an inappropriate place for debate on the floor of the United States Senate. I thank my colleagues.